Cities. Yeah, good. Well, I thank you for joining us today for this Philoptochos retreat. Again, I'm blessed to be with you and to be able to offer my thoughts and reflection on this theme of finding peace and love in an anxious and confusing world. It's not really bold or courageous to make the claim, or even that insightful to say that there is just this increase of a general feeling of anxiety across the board, from young to old, male and female, rich and poor, healthy and ill. Any way you cut it up, any demographic is reporting rising rates of anxiety. And why not? Look at the world around us. Right? In just the past few years, we've dealt with a health pandemic, economic and civil fallout from that pandemic. There's a war going on right now in Ukraine, natural disasters. Last night, a piece of metal was ripped off the roof in the middle of the Panagiotis hymn, right? Catastrophic climate events. There seems to be more and more uncertainty in the world. You can't follow the news without hearing something that might kill you, or politics which might oppress you, or some unattainable expectations of the society around you. And it's not just us here today who are struggling with anxiety and these feelings of dread. Quite honestly and quite notably, it's among our children and our grandchildren, the younger members of the world. According to the National Institute of Mental Health and the National Survey of Children's Health, anxiety disorders have risen 20% in adolescents in recent years. And they're now reporting that 1 in 3 teenagers experiences a diagnosable anxiety disorder. These young people, when they talk about what they're feeling, they put this emphasis on future success, internal pressure to conform to the images around them, and performance expectations. Social media is these major contributing factors of their feelings of anxiety. Pressure to do the right thing, to be the right thing, to say the right thing, to appear the right way. And as we see today, well, it might be most acutely felt among our young people. That is something that we all struggle with. And the feelings of anxiety and unrest in the world all stem from that same uncertainty. Right? But of all of this, even the retreat title today, Finding Peace and Love in an Anxious and Confusing World, raises kind of a problem, for me at least, in the way that we think about this. Because what it does, and the way that we talk about this, and the title that we're using, is that it assigns the anxiety out into the world. That it is the world that is anxious and anxiety-ridden, and we are stuck in the middle of that. But that's not necessarily how I look at it. Actually, the way I look at it is, we are feeling anxious, we are feeling confused because of what's going on around us. This anxiety and confusion doesn't take place out there in the world. It actually takes place within my heart. We'll see later as examples from Christ, the lives of the saints and the scriptures, about finding peace, and how finding peace and finding love in the midst of anxiety and confusion is not necessarily about changing the external experience. That what's going on around us oftentimes stays exactly the same. But peace comes not because the world around us finds peace, but because we, in our hearts, are able to focus and find peace and drive anxiety out. So whatever is going on out there in the world, our experience of it is not anxious or confused. In order to do that, our souls and our hearts need to be healed. We have to know where that anxiety comes from. Right? Ironically, as you'll see in a little bit, only when we know what we're dealing with can then we actually deal with it. As it relates to anxiety, anxiety is born out of the unknown. It is the fear and dread about uncertainties of the future. In his book, Running Scared, Fear, Worry, and the God of Rest, psychologist Edward Welch speaks about fear of the unknown in reference to the dread of anticipating a future event with an unknown outcome, he says, the hard part is the night before. Anxiety about the future event is usually worse than the event itself, because we don't know what is going to happen. We worry, we fear, we dread. We imagine in our mind all of the possibilities, all of the futures that could unfold before us, some of them plausible and some of them not at all, but yet we imagine them or we worry about them. And once we've stirred up our heart by thinking about all of these potential outcomes, we often still don't know what to do, because there's too many things to think about, too many choices to make, too many options in front of me. And psychologists call this choice anxiety, where actually having more options creates more anxiety. We would think that more choice would be freeing for us, but instead, more choice just leads to more uncertainty. Because now I'm not just afraid of the unknown, I'm afraid of making the wrong decision. It was amazing. I was speaking to somebody just this past week, one of our parishioners who lived overseas in Asia. And he talked about coming back to the United States, and he said, it's peanut butter. When I was in Asia, there was one jar of peanut butter. I was lucky to get peanut butter. Because now when I go into the store, I don't know what kind of peanut butter to buy. And I will stand and I will look. Do I get natural? Do I get natural crunchy? Do I get regular? Do I get regular crunchy? Do I get, now there's sunflower butter, right? And now there's almond butter, right? And so all of these choices, he was describing this to me, that his wife sent him out to go do the grocery shopping, and the grocery shopping became anxiety-inducing, right? Because if there was one option, he would be able to buy that option, bring it home, and say, this is all that was there. Instead, he now has to make the right choice, not just for him, but for his wife and his family. And if he makes the wrong choice, then what? We'll get to that question later. Not that exact example, but that question of if I make the wrong choice, then what? So this anxiety is born out of the question, what if? Right? What if I buy the wrong peanut butter? What if I don't get that job? What if I get sick? What if? What if? What if? So in her book, Christina Vinson, her book is titled God's Peace When You Can't Sleep. She highlights the dangers of this question. She says, the land of what ifs is a tempting place to dwell. It's also a dangerous place to be. Before you even pull back the covers, your mind is racing with questions. Again, what if I choke up during the meeting tomorrow? What if my child is diagnosed with a learning disability? What if the test results come back positive? What if I don't get the job? There are countless what-if scenarios, both big and small, but they have one thing in common. She says, they don't help. While you're lying in bed trying to gear down for the day, your mind is whirling, spinning every possible negative scenario into a sticky and all-consuming web, and you get trapped in it. You spend hours burrowing deeper and deeper with nothing positive to show. In fact, you're so imprisoned that you become paralyzed by fear and anxiety. Because I don't know what the future holds, and so I ask, what if? The land of what ifs is tempting, but also troubling. It's living out anxiety in our minds, hyping ourselves up to frightening, stressful scenarios that may never even come true. So both authors make this same point, that it is fear of the undetermined that infects our heart with confusion and anxiety. The undetermined and obsessing about what if is what causes our hearts to descend into confusion and anxiety. The world, if it's anything, just becomes a place, a medium, an arena for us to ask those what-if questions. But the world itself is not confused and anxiety-producing, it just is. It's our hearts that become the locus of this anxiety and confusion. We need to find peace internally So now we have the what of anxiety. But now it's time to turn to the why. Why do we spend so much time obsessing over the unknown? Why do we become so afraid? Why do we spend our lives playing out every possible scenario and working ourselves up and asking that what if question? And I found few answers as convincing as the answer provided by C.S. Lewis in his book, The Screwtape Letters. Has anyone read The Screwtape Letters? No. You should. You've got a week and a half left before Pascha. It's a quick read. Pick it up. But honestly, The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis is one of the most spiritually deep books. I'll say it again. Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis is one of the most spiritually deep books you will ever read. And it is so interesting, and it is so true in terms of its orthodoxy and its presentation, and yet it's unlike anything you've read from any of the fathers of the church. And yet everything he says is just so spot on. So the Screwtape Letters is this collection written by C.S. Lewis of satirical letters. They're not real letters. Between an elder demon and his nephew, younger demon, where the older demon is giving advice to the younger demon about how to tempt and ensnare his first assignment. A new young demon has just been given his first person to try and tempt and pull away from God. And so it's advice from a senior demon who knows how to do it to a younger demon. So you have to read it and understand that you need to do all of the opposite of what it says, right? You're not going in, reading it for spiritual advice and thinking, I'm going to do everything this book tells me. It tells you all the ways that the devil is trying to pull you away. It's great. Oh, it's wonderful. So, the older demon is named Screwtape and his nephew is named Wormwood. And the two demons converse back and forth about how to pull people away. What Screwtape says is, avoid big displays of your evilness. You're not going to pull people away from God by showing up with a pitchfork and trying to scare them. People don't do that anymore. People aren't afraid of that anymore. In fact, that might drive someone to faith. Instead, the long, slow road of distraction. Keep people distracted. That's the way. That's the tools of the evil one. In letter 6, Screwtape says, we, meaning the demons, want him to be in the maximum uncertainty so that his mind will be filled with contrary pictures of the future, every one of which arouses either hope or fear. There is nothing like suspense or anxiety for barricading a human's mind against the enemy. You have to understand here that from the demon's perspective, the enemy is God. So he says there is nothing quite like suspense or anxiety to barricade a human's mind against God. Someone who is anxious, Screwtape is saying, is too busy focusing on themselves to focus on God. The distraction of anxiety serves the purpose of the devil by forcing God into the background, so I can deal with more pressing issues. I have more important things to do right now because I don't know which peanut butter to buy. It becomes harder and harder over time to bring God back to the front if he spends all of his time in the back until eventually we don't fall into some big catastrophic sin that pulls us away from God and we totally reject him and we have this angry moment where we decide we're no longer Christians. Instead, we just get so worried and consumed about what's going on in our lives and trying to fix it and trying to hold on and trying to know the things that can't be known and being anxious and being worried that he just fades out of our attention. And then the evil one has successfully pulled us away. Not by big feats, but by slow, daily anxieties. Distraction, then, is the tool that the evil one uses to separate us from God. He uses the uncertainty of the future and the subsequent anxiety as a wedge between us and God. So we end up with this pattern. Uncertainty leads to anxiety. Anxiety leads to distraction, and distraction separates us from God. So the next thing that the devil does in order to keep us uncertain is he lies. He lies to us. And he convinces us, or tries to convince us, of things that are not true. Henry Nouwen calls the lies of the devil, he says there are three big lies that the evil one tries to convince us of in order to produce anxiety, uncertainty, and distraction. These three lies are: I am what I have. I am what I do. I am what people say about me. I am what I have. I am what I do. I am what people say about me. The devil tries to convince us that these things are true. He tempts us into building our identities around these lies. Either one or a combination of them. And then, after he has tempted us to start to believe, I am what I have, I am what I do, I am what people say about me, then he introduces the what if question. He truly is diabolical. He convinces us of something that is false, and then he gets us to question that falsehood, and that causes fear. So he initiates that uncertainty, that anxiety and distraction by convincing us of something that's not true, and then causing us to question whether that's true or not. So let's take an example from the scriptures and see how this plays out. And this one is particularly apt for a Philoptochos retreat. It's the example of Martha and Mary, right? How often do we feel like the Martha of our churches, right? Running around, taking care of things. I'm going to read the passage out loud so you can see the connection between the Philoptochos society and Martha. This is from the Gospel according to Luke. It begins, "Now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she approached him and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve you alone? Therefore tell her to help me.' And Jesus answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed. Mary has chosen the good portion which will not be taken away from her.'" How often do we run around anxious and troubled and distracted from what's happening in front of us because something needs to be done? Martha clearly believes that she is what she does. Martha is a doer. Martha works. Martha takes care of things. That's why she's serving. It's a task. It's something for her to do. Because if I don't do it, it won't get done. Right? So many of us build our identities around that sentence. If I don't do it, it won't get done. That is the belief that my identity is built upon what I do. Right? It's incredibly common, especially among us. Right? How often do priests say, "Oh my God, the Philoptochos does so much," right? We wouldn't be able to do this without the Philoptochos. And this is not to say that that's not true, right? But it's become part of our identity. You want something done, ask the Philoptochos, right? Right? I bring this up not to question the work ethic, right? And not to say that we're ungrateful, but to say that this is something I hope, at least I chose this example because I feel like we can identify with it the most. Because it's so easy to build this Martha type of identity for ourselves. And as I said, once we begin to believe that I am a doer, I get things done, that's when the devil starts to introduce the what if question. What if I don't do this? What if it doesn't get done? What if it doesn't even need to get done? Then what am I supposed to believe about myself? Look again at Martha and see this what if question and the resulting uncertainty and the anxiety and her distraction from the presence of God who is sitting in her house. I said before that the devil wants us distracted. God is literally sitting in her home, and she is serving him. But she can't see it because she's too concerned with what she's doing. Martha believes that you are what you do. Therefore, you have to be doing to be of any value. So what if you're doing nothing? Well, then you are nothing. So God sits in her house and she starts doing. The what if I don't do, what if I don't serve, that question brings into question her entire identity, who she has started to believe that she actually is, a doer. And that's where the uncertainty begins. This uncertainty is reinforced by the fact that her sister, not a doer. Mary seems completely uninterested in serving. Martha knows that doing is what matters. But she's confused by the fact that her sister isn't serving, and yet Christ isn't criticizing her, isn't telling her, get up and go help your sister. He's not rejecting her lack of doing. What if I'm serving and she isn't? Lord, don't you care? And if you don't care that she's not serving, what does that mean for me? Do you not care that I'm not serving? Well, that's what I do. I'm a doer. But you don't care? Well, what am I supposed to do with myself now? You want me to sit? There's things to be done. I can't do that. That's not true. So tell Mary to get up and help me, right? Because God forbid I'm working and I'm doing and somebody else isn't. That can build resentment. Do we, as we serve our churches, begin to feel resentment when we are doing and other people around us are sitting at the Lord's feet? Martha confronts Christ because she's uncertain in the identity she's built up. The fact that she is doing and somebody else is not doing, and God is not rejecting the not doer, causes her to question what's going on. In very clear terms, this internal conflict is described by St. Luke as producing anxiety within her and distracting her. Instead of focusing on the fact that Christ is in her home, she is nervous, and she's asking him to validate her false identity, that of a doer. Look the way the devil has turned her attention completely onto herself and her actions and away from the fact that God is in her home. That's what Christ criticizes when he says, you are anxious and troubled about many things. He doesn't criticize the serving. It's important to note that the fathers of the church, when they write about this passage, say nothing about the act of serving as if sitting at the feet of the Lord is better than serving. St. Ambrose of Milan, commenting, says, do not let service divert the knowledge of the heavenly word, nor is Martha rebuked in her good serving. St. John Cassian says, in looking after the Lord and his disciples, Martha did a very holy service. And St. Augustine, as she sat doing nothing but learning and praising, while her sister Martha was busy with all sorts of things. He's finishing a sentence about Mary. Indeed, what Martha was doing was necessary. So no one, not God himself, not his holy fathers and saints of the church, is criticizing Martha for running around and serving. It's the distraction that resulted from her compulsion to serve, her identity as a doer, that she couldn't set doing aside for a second. She was compelled to do it, and the thought of not doing it, and the thought of somebody else not doing it, the thought of not doing it well, what if people don't get their paksimadi? Like, oh no, God's not going to be in my house. He's in my house, but it's okay. It's more important that people get the kuluri than they're sitting down listening to God. Not because a cookie is more important, but because doing is important. So we see that she is anxious about what she believes to be the most important thing. And what she believes to be the most important thing, unfortunately, is the lie that the devil told her, that she is what she does. When we see a compulsion within ourselves to work, that we can't think of ourselves without our work, the anxiety that comes from potentially retiring, what am I going to do with myself? No one talks about all the anxiety that you feel not working, because I've worked my whole life. No one talks about the anxiety of what it means to have built my entire identity as a mother and someone who takes care of my kids. But now my kids have left, and now I have an empty nest. Now they're getting married. Oh, thank God, I've got a wedding to plan. I can do something. I was really starting to lose it for a second because I had nothing to do, and I didn't know what to do with myself. Then there'll be a baby shower. Great. And then there'll be something else to plan, right? And so you see, in this instance, it's not the events around in the world that is causing the anxiety. Instead, it's our compulsion to do, to be productive, because we can't think of ourselves without that. We don't know how to be without that. And this is just one example based on one of the lies. There are two others. I don't have time to go into them deeply, but I am what people say about me. This is the struggle of your kids and your grandkids. This is the struggle of social media. Young people grow up believing that their entire identity is built upon what people think and say about them. We have built an entire system of likes and shares. We can quantify how much people like me. We also have thumbs down, we have dislikes. If I believe that I am what people say about me, then I am tied to my phone because I have to be producing content, because I have to be producing likes. And all of the cyberbullying and all these things that we see and the anxiety in our young people comes out of, again, we can blame social media, but social media is just the place where it's happening. That's not necessarily the problem. The problem is that many of our young people, even ourselves, want that external validation and build our identity around what people say or think about me. Social media just makes it really easy to know what that is. Right? So the anxiety that exists among our young people, a lot of that comes from this lie. And a lot of them take to social media in order to build their brand and to, have a presence. But it's all about the likes. It's all about the follows. It's all about the shares. Because that means people like me. Because I believe that I am what people say about me. What about the lie that I am what I have? We consume and consume and consume, and we compete with the people around us. And it's not the fact that somebody else has something that produces anxiety in me. It's the fact that they have something, and I believe that I am what I have. And if they have something that I don't, well, what if they have something I don't? Does that mean they're better than me? Do I have to have that as well? So some people work very hard because they're doers. And they've built their personality and they built their identity around doing, and this lie. Some people work really hard in order to have money because they've built their identity around the things that they have. Some people work really hard to be seen because they've built their identity around what people think about them. These are all false identities. These are all ways that the devil confuses us in order to introduce uncertainty. Because the reality is, we are not what we do. We are not what people say about us, and we are not what we have. Instead, as Henry Nouwen continues this, he says, the truth, not the lies, but the truth, even though I cannot feel it right now, is that I am a chosen child of God. The truth is, I am precious in God's eyes, called His beloved. I am a beloved child of God. That is who I am. If that's the case, then what I do doesn't matter. Let's go back to Martha. If Martha thinks to herself, God is in my house. How blessed am I that He came to me? He is staying with us. God is here and He has chosen to bless me. She can then be freed from her compulsion to do. And what's amazing is when you're freed from your compulsion, then you can actually do the exact same thing you were just doing, but in a holy way, not in a way that leads to anxiety and distraction. So, for Martha, she is running around and serving because serving has to be done. Because if I don't do it, it doesn't get done. God, don't you understand what I'm doing? Can't you tell other people to join me? Right? Not God, thank you for coming into my house. Thank you for blessing me. Thank you for being with me and showing me your love. You chose me. How amazing is that? When Martha is free from her false identity by clinging to the truth, when she doesn't hold on to something that's uncertain, but she holds on to tangible truth, I am a beloved child of God. It doesn't matter if I don't serve. It doesn't matter if I do serve. That's not going to change. I am a beloved child of God. If it doesn't matter whether I serve or don't serve, then I am free to serve. Not because I'm compelled to serve, not because serving makes me who I am, but because by serving, I can share the love that I'm experiencing with people around me. Instead of passing out cookies and saying, here, we made this, I made this. Try my mellow macado now, I made it. Don't try that one, I made this one. Yeah. I've been to a Philoptochos event before, I know what's up. Instead of making the serving about her, she's now free to serve and go around and say, God's here. Have a cookie. God's here. Isn't it wonderful? We're with God. Eat. Listen. Go sit down at His feet. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. You don't have to do it. I don't need to serve. I don't need to sit at His feet. Anyway, He loves me. You see how she can run around and run around and run around just as much, and yet she has found peace and love. because she's held on to the truth, not the lie. The lie is so shaky and it's so uncertain that that's what produces the anxiety. So she runs around and runs around and runs around. Instead, when she knows that she is a beloved child of God, she runs around and runs around and runs around and is not distracted at all. The reality is, looking for peace in an anxious and confusing world, like I said, is not necessarily about the external situation changing at all. It's about our hearts being peaceful. And that only happens when we hold on to things we know to be true. Know in your heart that you are a beloved child of God. And regardless of what you have, you are a beloved child of God. Which means have a lot, have a little, you are a beloved child of God. Do or don't do, you are a beloved child of God. The only one who really matters, the only person outside of you who can tell you who you are, it's not social media, it's God. And what does he tell you? You are my beloved child. That is the anchor that gives us something solid to hold on to let go of all anxiety. So St. Paisios brings this up and he says this in reference to the world around. He says, quote, "What I see around me would drive me insane if I did not know that no matter what happens, God will have the last word." He is certain that God is sovereign, that God is merciful, that God will save his people. So it doesn't matter how crazy the world is around him. It doesn't matter what's going on in politics. It doesn't matter what's going on economically. It doesn't matter what's going on in anything. He's not going insane. He's not getting dragged in. He's not getting dragged in to all of the anxiety machine that the world has produced. Why? Not because the world around him is any different than the world around us. It's because he knows the truth. He knows that God will have the last word. And what is that last word? You are my beloved child. That's who you are. Everything else that might conflict with that identity, let it go. This is certain. Everything else is a lie from the evil one. Christ himself shows us this when he travels with his disciples. Again, this is coming from the Gospel according to Mark, where Christ is traveling in a boat, and there is a strong storm. I'll read it, and then we'll discuss. It says, "And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. But he," Christ, "was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And his disciples woke him and said, 'Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?' He arose, he rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' The wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to his disciples, 'Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?'" Now, you'll have to go back to our YouTube channel and watch my sermon from last Sunday to understand what we mean by faith when we're talking about faith. Faith is not a belief. First and foremost, faith is trust. He says, "Why are you so afraid? How is it you have no trust in me?" Christ is asleep in the boat. He has no anxiety. He is peaceful. Why? Because he knows that his Father will not let him drown. Because he knows that he can command the sea, honestly. Right? I don't have to worry about it. The sea's not going to drown me. I'm God. We could all sleep, right, if we had the same power. But he is criticizing his disciples because they're not holding on to that truth. They're not holding on to or trusting. They lack the faith, the trust, the belief, the certainty that they are with God, the creator of heaven and earth, who commands the winds and the sea. And they listen to him. They are uncertain about that. Christ is in the exact same storm. His experience of the world is not different. Well, his internal experience is different. But externally, everything else is going on the same. He's getting splashed with waves. He's being tossed about, and yet he's asleep. Why? Because he's certain. Why aren't they asleep? Because they're afraid. Ask themselves, put yourself in the mind of the disciples. If I were to die right now in this boat, what would happen to me? Well, like the thief on the right hand, I would go into paradise. Okay, I can sleep if I know that if I die tonight, I'm going to paradise. I don't have to stay up and worry about the things that I have to do tomorrow. Right? And so we see in this example of Christ, we see in the words of St. Paisios, and we see in the example of Martha, that the world is not necessarily anxious and confused. The world just is. How do we find peace in the midst of that? How do we drive anxiety and confusion out of our own hearts? How do we stop believing the lies of the evil one and asking ourselves, what if? We hold on to those things that are certain and true. I am a beloved child of God. He brings me salvation. If we hold on to this, if we know that God will have the last word, then we don't have to ask, what if? It doesn't matter. What if I don't get the job? God will have the last word. What if I get sick? God will have the last word. What if? That fades away. Instead, we hold on to the truth. I think that's enough for today. We have some time for questions, and then I will give you guys a chance to break and socialize and whatnot. If there are no questions, then we can break. But if there are questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Raise your hand. Vani will moderate.
No, we wanted to thank Father Panagiotis for a very wonderful, informative session today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Yep.
So any questions, please feel free.
Yes. So I mentioned a couple of books. Let me give you the one that you're asking about is called God's Peace When You Can't Sleep. Christina Vinson. The other one, the first one I referenced was Running Scared, Fear, Worry, and the God of Rest by Edward Welch. And then the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Edward Welch, W-E-L-C-H. Yep. Yes.
How do you know when, as far as books go, ones your Christian friends talk about these books? How do you know if it's fine to read?
So the question was, when people give you books or your Christian friends might recommend books, how do you know what's appropriate to read, what kind of aligns with our Orthodox teaching and whatnot? We're going to go back to St. Paisios, who, it's funny, took this from St. Basil, and you see how it goes. The teachings of the church and the fathers of the church have said you have to you have to be like a bee. That's where, if you have heard of Be the Bee from the Archdiocese, this is where this comes from. It comes from a letter that was written to St. Basil, asking him, like, should I read ancient Greek philosophy? Because at this point in time, when the Christian world was establishing itself, there was pagan philosophy. How am I supposed to read pagan philosophy if I'm a Christian? And so St. Basil says you have to be like a bee. A bee goes to the flower, takes the nectar it needs, and then moves on to the next flower. The bee doesn't take the entire flower with him. He just takes what is good, what is useful, and then moves on to the next. And so the tricky part to this question of how do I know like what to read and what not to is there are very few things I say don't read. And I think there's so much can be gleaned from reading. But we take those things that are beneficial and we leave the rest. We don't need to take everything. Not everything is beneficial for us. A bee bringing an entire flower head back to his hive is not going to be able to get that in, and it's not going to help, and it's pointless and useless. It's a waste of their effort and energy and time. What they need is the nectar to make their honey, right? The hard part about this is the bee knows which part of the flower to go to. The bee knows where to take the nectar. If we don't know what our church teaches, then it becomes very, very difficult to take a book recommended to us or something recommended to us from a friend, a well-meaning friend, and to be able to pull out those things that are true and those things that are beneficial and to leave behind everything else. So, read like a bee, taking things that are beneficial, but strive first to know the teachings of Christ, the true and full teachings of Christ as he presents them and they're revealed in the Orthodox Church. Because if I don't know what Christ is teaching in his fullness in the Orthodox Church, I can't read a book by a Protestant author and not get confused about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So it's hard. I'm not a concise person, as you can tell. So long-winded answer is you need to be rooted in the faith, which means listen to sermons, read Orthodox things, listen to Orthodox podcasts, pray regularly, come to the sacraments and the services, be steeped in Orthodoxy, and then if somebody gives you a book, you can read whatever they hand you, you can take what you need, you can throw away the rest. Without that first part, you can't do the second. So, yeah, Margot.
I think that as parents, it is not going to be to expose some negative things in school, but it gives us an opportunity to bring it to the table and make our kids become stronger and have a discussion, because it makes it harder when they go to college and they go blind. So it's a great opportunity for negative things to bring it to the table and have a discussion.
Was that a question or was that a comment? So Margot brings up a really important point in terms of parenting that I think we should emphasize, which goes back to certainty. Knowing that God will have the last say, knowing what is true, means we don't need to be afraid of what's going on around us. Right? That's how we get rid of the anxiety. So when we're concerned about our children or our grandchildren, the world they're growing up in, and the things they're being taught, and the things they're being exposed to, we can approach them fearfully with a lot of anxiety. And our kids pick up on that. They could read when we're afraid of something. And that tells them, ooh, this thing has power. Maybe, especially the rebellious ones, maybe I want to look into this because mom and dad are afraid of it, or Yaya's afraid of it. But if we are secure in the truth, if we are firmly founded in the truth, we don't need to be afraid of anything that is false. Why? Because in the end, God will have the last say. Okay, you can teach that. I know what's true. Okay, you could pass that policy. I know what is true. I don't need to be anxious and fearful in the midst of the world because I know what is true. So teaching our kids is not about teaching them to be afraid of the world, but it's about steeping them in the security of the truth. And when they're steeped in the security of the truth, you don't have to worry so much because there's nothing to worry about. So, yeah.
What advice do you give to maybe young adults
Mm-hmm.
or relations when you are in corporate America
Mm-hmm.
and you are in an environment that is deep rooted in obviously power,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, perception?
Right.
Perception can be very far from what the truth is.
Right. So the question was, how do you, what advice for young adults or people working in the corporate world where you are constantly told you have to produce, right? If you don't produce, you're not going to make it, and you're constantly judged based on what people in the corporation think about you and the relationships you have and how you develop those things and whatnot. I go back to what I said before about the externals not having to change, but the internals having to change. Martha, just to go back to that example, I am willing to bet you that were Martha focused on God is in my house, that she would have served more efficiently, more fully, and more joyfully than she was serving, because at that point it was all about producing. It was all about producing because she equals her product, right? Her output is what she is. And so in the corporate world, especially people who are starting off on their jobs, making sure that they know who they are then means I have the freedom to do without the compulsion, to go back to it, right? So somebody who is working in a law firm or somebody who's starting a new marketing job or somebody who's just getting their foot in the door, right? Being told that I need to produce because I am my results, believing that means they're working for the results, means they're working for that identity, to establish that identity. I'm worth something as a person because I'm producing results. If my worth is established independent of my results, I will get better results, quite honestly, because I'm not contending with all of my fear. It might sound like a doorway to laziness, to say like, well, if I just hold on to I'm a beloved child of God, then it doesn't matter and everything else, right? I know that that's one of the critiques that we hear, but it's honestly the opposite. I've never seen somebody secure in their identity, secure in their uniqueness as a child of God, loved by God, created by God, who God wants to see succeed and thrive, who God wants in his kingdom, who God wants to be healed, right? Like, I've never seen somebody who's secure in that also not be successful in life. And so the reality is, to push back against those false beliefs doesn't mean that you get a different result on paper. It means you get a different result in your heart and a different result in the kingdom. But I honestly have yet to see somebody who is secure in that truth, not able to do their calling well because they're free to do their calling. I don't know if that's helpful, but if we're worried about results, the trick is to not be worried about results and then get good results. I don't know how I don't know how you do that, but yeah. Yes. Martha, the story of Martha and Mary comes from Luke chapter 10. It's the end of chapter 10. We actually read this on every feast day of the Virgin Mary as well. But this is a common reading in the church. But it's Luke chapter 10, I believe, in the 30s and 40s is the citation. In the back, Elena, did you have your? Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say,
Mm-hmm.
Martha was concerned about serving, but it was focusing on herself.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I relate to this is something happened, say personally, and there was resentment in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
So once we start to feel something like that, is that like a little flag for us
So the question was, sometimes when you're serving, when you're doing something, resentment can develop, and how do you know? Is resentment kind of a sign that you might be entering into or conducting yourself or doing something without the right mindset, the right intent, the right heart? And I would say definitely resentment is something that should be. I'm not going to be concise again. We need to think a lot about how we think. It's one thing to think our thoughts, but a Christian who is developing and growing in their spiritual life also thinks about their thoughts. And so when we feel resentment, it's one thing to feel resentment. It's another thing to know that I'm feeling resentment and to know why I'm feeling resentment. And so the spiritual growth comes in with not just thinking our thoughts, but thinking about our thoughts. I am resentful because of X, Y, and Z. Martha is resentful, just to take this off of you and bring it back to her. Martha is resentful of Mary, right? And she expresses that resentment. She has thought through, she's resentful. But she doesn't ask herself, why am I resenting Mary for sitting at the Lord's feet? Is it because I want to sit at his feet, but I feel compelled to serve? Is it because I'm serving and she's not serving and she's not being a good host because I'm the arbiter of what makes a good host, right? It's still all about, right? So Martha's not doing that next phase of, I just had a thought. Why did I have that thought? Right? And that is how we actually grow spiritually. That is how we overcome these lies. Why do I believe that? Why is serving the most important thing when God is in my house? Why is it important to me that my sister is doing the exact same thing that I'm doing? Do I need to be in control? Is that what's going on? Right? Well, it's a whole other issue. I'm going to leave that one aside. But why do I need to, then the next question goes, why do I need to be in control? Because I'm afraid of not being in control. Why am I afraid of not being in control, right? And this is spiritual growth. This is how, right, the monks and nuns of the church daily recite and reflect their thoughts to their elders, so their elders can help them go through this process of not just thinking their thoughts, but understanding their thoughts. And so if I feel resentment, if I feel something that's unholy, if I feel anger, if I feel jealousy, if I feel anxiety, it's not enough to just name it. That's the first step. For many people, that in and of itself is a huge step to say, I feel anxious right now. I don't know why, but I feel anxious right now. That's the first step. But then to go and say, why do I feel this? What is this telling me about myself and how I'm handling the world or this situation? So when you feel resentment, that does become an opportunity to ask ourselves, why? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about this situation? What is going on internally that is keeping me from God? Because Martha could have served and Mary could have sat all without resentment if Martha wasn't afraid of not doing. Her resentment comes out of her, not because Mary's doing anything wrong. Again, the situation doesn't have to change. It's not about the entire world being completely different so that I can be peaceful and I can just sit down and be like, the world is peaceful, now I'm peaceful. It's about finding peace internally in the world. It's about me not being anxious in the world. So our thoughts, our feelings become an invitation to dive deeper. It's not enough just to think and feel them. We need to investigate them as well. That's what a spiritual father is for. That's what they help you do. Dive deeper and investigate our thoughts. So I want to make sure that you do have some time to socialize with one another and to be. So I'm going to wrap up our questions here, and then we have about 20 minutes before we will reconvene here back in the church for the prayers of the 6th hour. Thank you very much.